Hi everyone, welcome this evening to this online session brought to you by Museums and Heritage Show Online in partnership with One-to-One Interview Coaching. I'm Sarah Bowen, I'm the content manager for the show, and I'll be chairing today's session when I'm not admitting people from the waiting room. So today we'll be discussing interview skills, and we're joined by interview expert Claire Jenkins. She will share tips and techniques to help you secure your next job. We are expecting this session to last for approximately an hour. And we know that we cannot cover everything to do with securing a new job in that time, but our plan is to run another session in the near future to cover other elements involved in the process of securing a new job. Just want to run through a couple of things before we get started. Do feel free to turn your video on or off, entirely up to you, but we will ask that you mute your microphone. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to all registrants. Probably tomorrow we'll send that out. We're aiming to finish by 8. We are hoping to include some questions at the end. Please do feel free to put questions in the chat. It is going to be an interactive session, so we will be running polls and asking questions throughout, and that's to make sure that we're answering the questions that you guys want us to be answering. The polls are anonymous, so no problems there. If you have any questions, like I said, pop them in the chat, and if we don't cover them during the session, then we might be able to do some follow-ups, like I said. So I can't see much more activity happening in the waiting room. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to expert Claire Jenkins to kick off the session.
Well, welcome everybody. It's great interest in this, which is brilliant news. So hi, my name is Claire Jenkins and I run one-to-one interview coaching. So my day job is coaching individuals mostly, but also groups on how to succeed at interview. So I run my own business. My background, actually I was thinking back, my first work experience was in working with an arts officer in a theatre box office just outside Edinburgh. And then I went to work in Bath and I was involved with sports and special events. And then I work in the South Wales Valleys on heritage and tourism. So that was my early career. I've been to various places since then, but so actually I do know a little about certainly the heritage sector and some of the related bits. And I would just like to, before we start, to very much thank the Museums and Heritage Show for inviting me this evening, which is brilliant. Now, my expertise is in job interviews, and that's where I want the focus of this evening's session to be. We've got an awful lot of things to get through this evening in a very short time. So I mentioned that my expertise in job interviews. I need to take you on a whistle-stop tour first, though, of the job market and give you some suggestions about job search to get us to the interview part. Now, if there are bits that that are not part of my expertise, I will tell you, because there may be things that aren't part of what my expertise is about. Sarah's mentioned some ground rules. It would be helpful if people keep their mics off. And my aim really is to focus on practical tips wherever I can in terms of suggestions for you, things for you to do. All questions are good questions. And we're going to use the chat function quite a lot. So we'd also welcome, if people have got suggestions or ideas or good practice they want to share in the chat function, please feel free to use it for that as well. We're going to make it as interactive as we possibly can, bearing in mind there are lots of people due to be attending, so it's a very large group. So that's quite tricky, but we're going to be using the polls and also the chat function. The polls will give me a better idea in terms of gauging what you're facing and what your experience is. And the chat function we're going to use to try and collect questions. And what I'm going to do before each section, ahead of each section, I'm going to ask you for questions for the next section. So it'll make sense once we get into it. But at each stage, I'll invite you to ask questions on a particular thing. And then as we go through, Sarah's going to be checking for what's coming up in the chat. And then I'll pick up what's actually said, or I'll tell you if I'm going to wrap it into what I'm going to talk about. And then we've got a session at the end where we're going to hopefully pick up all those questions that we haven't picked up so far. It'll make sense as we go along. So before we start, I'm going to ask Sarah to launch poll number 1, which is about you guys, so I can know a little bit about who's in the room, as it were. So Here we go. So are you in work, on furlough, a student, or out of work? It's all anonymous, so please answer, don't answer, whatever you want, just so that I get some idea of what the proportion of the people in the group are.
Okay, lots of voting happening. The majority are in work, 44% in work. Then we've got close on the other three, 20% student, 19% furlough, 18% out of work.
So can you just go through, so what's the big thing
The
again?
big one was in work, 44%.
That's great. And poll 2, which is about, are you looking for work at the moment? So the poll is about, I'm currently actively looking, half looking, or not looking. Just to give me a bit of an idea about what you guys will need.
55% actively looking.
Okay.
39% half looking, 6% not looking.
Okay, so we've got lots of interest in the room. I mean, that's kind of not surprising given what we're doing tonight. And in terms of your interview skills, how would you rate your interview skills at the moment?
Oh, mixed bag, this one. Just let that settle. The majority think they're either above average or below average. They're pretty even. Not many people backing their skills as excellent, and a few think they need lots of improvement.
Oh, you know, if you put excellent, then I think, well, you know, maybe you don't need this seminar. So that's good. So we're kind of above and below. That's excellent. So this evening, what we want to do is really boost your prospects. We want to build some confidence. I want to give you some ideas and practical tips to try. And also, I'm going to answer as many questions as we possibly can, given that we've had interest from a lot of people for this session. So in terms of the structure, I'm going to start with some quick wins, because we like quick wins to start off with, and some reassurance, which I think is going to help hopefully with some of the confidence stuff. Then I'm going to talk briefly about the context. So how's the job market? What's likely to happen? And then I'm going to touch on what you can be doing now. So wherever you are in terms of furlough, working from home, between jobs, in jobs, whatever, what you can be doing at the moment. And I'm going to give you some suggestions that I think about job search. And then what I want to do is concentrate on the interview skills bit. So especially on the online stuff, which is what most people are going to face in the short term. And then we'll get some final questions. So in the chat function, and I've mentioned it to one or two folks who came in a bit earlier, if you could just put some brief notes in there about what is special about the museums and heritage sector that I may not know. So if I'm coaching people for job interviews in the museums and heritage sector, what is different about this that I should know? And then that will help me in terms of making sure that I get my message right. That would help me. So feel free to use the chat function to talk about what's different about museums and heritage. Okay, so I want to move on to some quick wins and reassurance that I promised you. And also to cover some of the questions that people were very kind to give me in advance. So Sarah, if you can launch slide A, the quick wins slide, that'd be great. So let me just flick to what you're looking at there. So just so that you are aware, there are some questions that come up in any interview, because they're going to ask you why you're here in some shape or another. I mean, that's going to be an early question, isn't it? Why are you here? And why do you want to work with us? And also, what can you bring to us? What's special about you? So those are things that you're going to get asked in every interview. I know they're fairly broad, but those are things that you can practice and have some confidence about. The other thing I put on this slide is what I would call transferable skills. So transferable skills are really, really, really important. I can't emphasize this enough. This is the things that any job needs. Can you play nice with other people? Can you organize your own work? You know, how good are you at problem solving, customer care, all of those things. So I've given you some suggestions there. I'm going to leave that up for a bit for people to take notes if they want to. But those transferable skills, really, you know, one could argue are part of any job. So we've got some quick wins there, because if you can answer why you're here, why do you want to work here, and what can you bring, and then if you can have some answers on questions that are going to face these transferable skills. So they won't be specific to museums and heritage. Any job that you go for, these transferable skills are going to be handy, because the transferable skills are what's going to score you points in terms of getting you shortlisted. They're going to be what they ask you about at interview, and they're going to be how you score your points at interview itself. Now, we've had some questions in advance, which is great. Thank you so much. It gives me a real idea of kind of hot topics in terms of questions. So we had quite a lot of questions, as you imagine, about Zoom and online interviews. So we're going to cover that later, and also how to build rapport online. So I'm going to use that. If you're interested, I've done a YouTube video, which is only 3 minutes long, but it talks about how to be seen and heard in an online interview. So please look that up. If you put my name in, if you put one-to-one interview coaching, you'll find that. I'm going to cover transferable skills because I've just mentioned it, but I also intend to cover this later when we're talking about how to guess the questions in an interview. Someone asked about expectations. Should I be looking upwards in terms of promotion type interview, job opportunities, or should I be looking sideways? Well, only you can tell that. However, what you might want to do is include a kind of plan A and plan B. So start looking upwards, but decide at what point you might then choose to also look sideways. I mean, it kind of depends on how quickly you need to get another job. So that will be, we're going to talk a bit about that later. Should I start looking now or later? I would always encourage people, even if you're in a job that you love, to be looking, to be open to opportunities and looking around at what's happening in the sector. So my advice would be start now, because you can just do it, do it slowly, take your time, have a good look round. So I would say start looking sooner rather than later for anybody. Even if you're in a job that you love, one should be aware of what's happening in the marketplace and what jobs might be open. People asked about perceived and actual gaps in experience, skills and qualifications. Now, you've got you may well have some time now, you may not if you're really busy homeschooling kids or whatever, but if you've got some time now, there are things that I'm going to talk about later in the job search section that you can be doing for yourself to get yourself some points and get some preparation done. And in terms of gaps, a lot of them are more perceived. So I think in our minds, anybody feels that they have more gaps than is the reality. So just explore what you think is a gap. Do perhaps a brainstorm with yourself. Is it really a gap? Can I explain how much I know about this? But you've got some time now before you go to your next interview to work out how you're going to plug those gaps. You may well face some online tests, and I'm going to come back to that as part of the stuff about interviews. There were some questions about health and disability, which I have to say I'm not an employment law specialist. So if you've got specifics about that, I'm afraid you'll have to go to an employment law specialist. And also we had quite a lot of questions about transitioning into the sector, particularly as recent graduates. So really I would say to yourself, equip yourself for the challenges of the sector. Find experts in the field. Friends of friends will know somebody who you can talk to, pick their brains. Really think about what the transferable skills that you can bring into the museums and heritage sector, and also think about how can you volunteer. And actually somebody put that in the chat room quite rightly. Is there something that you can do as a volunteer for the National Trust or whoever it is, volunteering at a local museum or in a local theatre or a drama group? What is there that you can do in terms of volunteering that can plug that gap? We're going to go on to some context setting now. So in terms of the job market, I want to talk about now kind of reality and sort of reality plus a bit of after. So situation now in the job market, it's very patchy. I mean, there are pockets of all sectors where there is growth, and then the opposite is also true. So all industries are very different. They will all, however, be looking at really hard at what's essential and business critical in terms of costs and overheads, because they're going to have to minimise those. You know, times is tough, so there's going to be some hard questions asked in terms of business critical activity. And also the immediate focus is on the crisis, isn't it? I mean, you know, everyone's personal thoughts and business thoughts are, you know, how do we deal with the current pandemic? In terms of the reality, well, particularly for more senior roles, if anyone watching it finds a job, let's say tomorrow, in an advert, the reality is going to take 2 or 3 months to get into that job. So particularly from the more senior end of roles, looking at October, November, December before you start the next job. That's if you find a job advert straight away. So in terms of reality, think about the lag in between when you see a job advertised and when it's actually put in place. Now, there may be some speeding up of that, particularly in those sectors that are expanding quickly. So, you know, but the optimism of each of us as individuals, but also of business really, will depend on what they think of their prospects beyond lockdown and what does realism bring into that mix, really. It's certainly speeded up possibly inevitable changes, switching to things to digital. We've all seen a lot of that. Home working certainly has been speeded up faster than it would have done if it had just been left to grow organically. And we've all faced those challenges of setting up relatives or friends or whatever on Zoom quizzes or whatever it is, but there's going to be, you know, there's some home working things. And also environmentally, in terms of, you know, walking more, using public transport, but doing it wisely. And then the kind of reality stroke after, and I'm not quite sure where we are now really in terms of that, but the priority has to be minimising transmission and public health and safety. It has to be that. And the reality is that the job market is going to be very competitive, particularly as furlough is starting to phase out, if you're lucky enough to be on furlough, if that's seen as a lucky thing. But certainly the job market is going to get tighter. As furlough finishes, there will be more redundancies. I mean, that's a reality of life. So selection and interviews will go with that in terms of competitive. We're going to see lots more online interviews. We're going to talk about that later. Face-to-face will be less likely, depending on what part of the industry you're in. So the reality will be that you will be signing in online rather than handshaking. Not sure when we're going to handshake again. And you're going to have to, instead of going into a room, you're going to have to use your peripheral vision in terms of what we call reading the room, in terms of how's people body language, do they like me, are they smiling, are they writing things down? And we know that the reality of the workplace is that it's going to be more online, it's less likely to be in a premises or face-to-face. Sarah, if you could launch poll 4, which is about basically whether are you going to be staying in museums and heritage or are you looking to move out? I'll leave that for a moment.
It's looking like, yeah, staying in the sector, 60%, and then a low number of 6% moving out and 34% not sure yet.
Which is great. And I think that also speaks to what you mentioned earlier about the passion. People are in it because they're absolutely passionate about it. So I think that speaks to that. And then poll 5, which is when you're anticipating needing or looking for your next job. Just to give us some idea of timescales, please.
Okay.
Folks, if people can just mute their mics. If
that one's looking at, it's pretty even between the now and within 6 months.
Okay.
They're both top, and then less within a year, and then even less, not sure.
Okay. So there's an immediacy there, isn't there, in terms of people wanting help with all of this, which is great. So if we move on then to things that you can be doing now, so whatever your status is now, between jobs, furlough, working from home, working, whatever, use the time. I know this sort of sounds a bit sort of trite really, but use the opportunity that you've got to think about how can you demonstrate job-related skills. Now, we've got on the screen still the transferable skills. So how could you, however tenuously, describe what you're doing now in terms of those transferable skills? So how are you project managing homeschooling the kids? What, are you managing a budget for an elderly relative in terms of their shopping? Have you had to problem solve because of something? Think about how you can use words from the workplace in a job sense in terms of what you're doing at the moment, just to give you a bit more control. You're not being watched by your boss if you're at home or between jobs, etc. So you've got an opportunity here. There's also an opportunity, and I know, we all said, we're going to learn something. We're all going to learn, we're all set out when we knew it was going to be lockdown to learn all sorts of things. Some have done that, some haven't. But in terms of learn some new skills, we've all had to learn how to use more IT, more digital, more technical stuff. A lot of us had to learn how to remote work. We've had to be more self-reliant. We've had to use resourcefulness and adaptability, and those skills are going to be absolutely top, because employers will want people who can be flexible, because we don't know what's going to happen, sometimes on an hourly basis, but a daily basis, a weekly basis. All those chances that you've used to use your resourcefulness, adaptability are going to come in handy. Some people have been homeschooling, some people have had more caring responsibilities, and we've all had to think about time management in terms of juggling and reprioritising what we're doing. These are great skills, transferable skills. And also, I hope that along the way, we've learnt some better self-care and resilience, because we can, everyone can do that. I know some folks have done some decluttering. We certainly have here. And however busy you've been, the pandemic has given us potentially some thinking time, some time to think differently, maybe refocus, maybe reprioritise, maybe make a plan in our heads, maybe write one down, but certainly have a plan. Do we want a new role? Do we want a different role? And we've just heard from the poll that this is, most people who are listening are in some way pretty actively looking to change their jobs in the next 6 months. So I asked those people who came earlier and the ones that were in at the beginning, what's different about the museums and heritage sector that I should know that I may not know, since I haven't been employed in it for several years. I'm going to read those, but my challenge to you, and I'm going to leave a bit of a pause, is I'd like to move now to what are your questions about job search? What are your questions about job search? So if Sarah could just write job search in the chat function, just to remind folks, we'd like to collect some questions on that. And while you think about questions on job search, I'm just going to have a quick whiz back through the chat function to find out what you've told me about the museums and heritage context before we move on to the job search section of what I'm going to say. So I'll give you a few moments. Let me go back. Important point there, as someone's made, about wearing lots of different hats in the sector.
There's a lot in the chat as well, Claire, about how vital volunteering is, but how it can be detrimental that, that seems to be such a solid route in for most people, and obviously doesn't cover expenses and everything to be able to do it.
But it is a great opportunity to fill those either actual or perceived gaps in your background, and things to talk about at interview, which is really important. Lots of people talking about their first roles, volunteering. Yeah. That's brilliant. I'm getting a really good, thank you very much. So I'm getting a real great feel for, as we said, the passion of the sector, the importance of volunteering, but on the other hand, the challenges of that, because it's not bringing in money, but it is an opportunity to learn things, which is great. Brilliant. Okay. So starting. I'm whizzing down some of the chat function, and I think we're starting to move to people are sharing best practice, which is great. Some folks sharing good websites to look for jobs, which is lovely. And also some links, which is also really useful. Thank you. Buzzwords, yeah, buzzwords are really important. You need to make sure that you're using the right words, because lots of this stuff is going to be either actually or potentially assessed by AI, so you've got to be using the right words. Brilliant. We've got some more. That's great. So let's think then about job search. So I want to do this. This is just my initial suggestions. I want to take a whiz through this. We've got a couple of polls before we start, and I'll have a look at the questions on that in a minute. The poll 6. So how are you looking for jobs then, please? So you can tick all the ones that apply, and then we can get a spread for the kind of mix of how people are doing their job search. And then Sarah, if you can give me a flavour of what that looks like.
Just waiting for that to settle. Okay, so we're looking at top 2 results: specialist websites, forums, associations, institutes, and online jobs board. Next up is LinkedIn, and then we go friends and relatives, approaches direct to potential employers, and recruitment agencies.
Great, that's great. And that's where you guys can help each other in the chat function, and some people have already started doing that in terms of sharing links and names of websites and institutions and societies and that kind of thing. So that'd be great. If people have got a great one that they've come across, and pop it in the chat function. That's brilliant. We've got the next poll as well, please, Sarah. So this is to give me a feel of whether people, I mean, I know you've answered slightly this in the last question, but in terms of a balance, mostly are people applying direct to employers, or mostly are people using recruitment agents?
Okay, direct to employer.
Great.
By far, 94%.
Oh, hurrah. And that's the right answer in terms of it's more likely to get you success. If you are speaking to somebody who is the person who's going to be the company that the organisation that you're going to, then you know there's an actual job, and you're dealing with somebody who's going to give you firsthand what they need, etc. So that's great. The challenge if you're going through agents, and some sectors, and I guess there will be some folks in there who are using recruitment agents, there are some sectors, there are some geographies, certainly London-based things or urban-based things for those people who are further afield. There are sectors, there are geographies where you kind of have to go through recruitment agents. And some organisations, certainly museums, museum groupings, without being specific, but I know that I've prepared people for museums jobs, and they use recruitment agents. So they may well, but you have to go through that. The challenge with a third party is that it's not a first party. You know, the message may get slightly garbled. It may not be exactly what you think it is, and you're, effectively, you've got this opportunity for the message to get garbled. So if you can go direct, that's brilliant. You know, there's a job, you're speaking to somebody who's actually going to give you the job. So I'm going to read your questions about job search. If Sarah could just type interview questions into the chat function, and I appreciate that you may have questions kind of at the wrong time. It's not the wrong time. Pop them in there anyway. We're going to try and capture as many as we possibly can. But I'm going to have a quick look through the job search questions that you've posed. And if you can start having some thinking time and pop in the questions that you've got about interviews into that chat function. That's great. So let me have a little look back through. People have been really, thank you very much in the chat function for folks who are giving ideas and various websites, which is brilliant. and the conversations going on in the chat room between, which is brilliant. Mentoring schemes, yeah, lots of really useful stuff in there. That's great. Okay, that gives me a flavour, which is brilliant. So Sarah, if you can launch slide B. So I've got some suggestions here about job search things or questions to be asking yourself, I suppose. So how are you going to market yourself? Because that's effectively what it is. So you've got the opportunity to be doing this without someone in an office standing over you. So we've got a bit of opportunity to do this in your own time. And you can be specific. And be as specific as you possibly can so that you can narrow your search. We talked about possibly having plan A and plan B. That could be different parts of the sector. It could be different timings in terms of maybe I'll start now looking for promotion, but if I get so far down the line, I might then have plan B where I'm doing that, but I'm also looking at sideways moves. What role types, which employers would be great to work with? And we've got some opportunity now during this time, which are the conscientious employers, which ones are using furlough and which ones have gone straight to redundancies without even going through furlough, because that might give you some idea of what kind of people they're going to be in terms of employers. Which employers are better placed to survive COVID. Find yourself some recent job descriptions. Somebody mentioned Buzzwords. The job descriptions will give you some idea of what buzzwords and what the latest jargon is, and also some idea of whether you're going to need to be doing some upskilling and chances to address that now. Maybe think about, picking the top 3 jobs, top 3 employers, top 3 sectors, top 3 locations, whatever it is, because I guarantee if you think about top 3, you're going to end up with 4 or 5, but at least it's starting to narrow the field down. And most importantly, and that's why the box is bigger, who do you know who might know somebody in there or who can give you some help or put you in contact with somebody else? Use your network of friends and family, ask for advice, useful contacts, online catch-ups, perhaps over a cuppa. Who do you know who could get you into that? LinkedIn, great. Make sure you've got a good photo on your profile. Think of it as a live career summary. And connect with people who you liked working with. Personalise your connection to it. Start a dialogue. Do recommendations, request recommendations, but pick people that you liked and that you liked working with, because they probably liked working with you as well. Engage in the groups, learn what's a hot topic, keep up to date, get involved with the debate, raise your profile, connect with me before your potential current employer perhaps sees you connect to a job interview coach. So right, okay, so let's get on to interviews. So we're a little bit behind schedule, but we're going to try and catch that up. So Sarah, if you can launch poll 8, please. So just to give me some idea of how long has it been since you last had an interview?
Just letting that run.
Sure.
Okay. Right. Last job interview, 83% in the last 5 years. 6% 5 to 10 years ago, 8% longer than 10 years ago, and 4% never had one. Actually,
you'd be amazed at how many people have never had an interview for one reason or another. They started as temp, they got a job because of their mate or because they happened to be the only person who turned up and they got given the job, etc. But I'm heartened by the fact that lots of you had had interviews recently. That's great. So you're going to feel like you know what to expect. Those people who haven't been interviewed for a while, it's a little bit of a game. You might feel that you're kind of out of match practice, as it were, but ask your friends to practice with you. Employ some of the tips that we've talked about tonight, which is great. And also poll, where are we now? So poll number 9.
Yeah, number 9.
In terms of online interviews. So were you interviewed online with somebody at the other end? Were you interviewed with a panel at the other end? Or were you interviewed what is becoming more common practice, nobody at the end. So literally, computer camera comes on, you have 2 minutes to answer the question that's typed into the bottom of the screen. It's assessed by AI. They are assessing purely on the words that you use and also your facial expressions, body language from, the neck up, as it were. So think about that in terms of.
We've got 57% with a panel, and 32% one-to-one, and then 11% with the AI.
Oh, so we've got some people. I called it, the best way I can describe it is a kind of Big Brother diary room, but it's not quite, I don't think it's friendly as that. But yeah, so it's a skill on itself. So you need to practice that specifically. And in terms of other tests that you might face at interview, because I wanted to with one or two early questions in advance about questions, tests that you might face as well as just an interview. So just an interview. So are you going to have to give a presentation? Are you likely to face an in-tray exercise? Are they likely to use personality psychometric profiling tests and maybe verbal mathematical reasoning? I mean, there might be any number of other things, but just to give me an idea of how many folks will face those sort of tests. I mean, they ought to be job-related tests. So testing a skill that you're going to have to use in the job, they ought to be. They may not feel like that, but they ought to be.
Someone's actually asked, what is an in-tray exercise?
Okay, so I mean, in the old days, it used to be literally a file full of letters and things printed out. But of course, these days we do that online with emails. So an in-tray exercise is where you're faced with, basically an email in-tray box. Your messages coming in on your email. And then you've got a certain amount of time to work out how important are they, how to prioritize them. Do some of them need to go in your diary? Which is most important? Why is it important? So it's literally an in-tray, but this will be an online email test.
So the most popular on this one, presentation. We've got 88% on that.
Wow.
Okay. And then the next three are pretty even, and I did note that someone in the chat earlier said that they would be expected to do a role play.
Yes. I've come across that with people going into the airline industry, customer facing things, and also in the medical. So dealt with orthopedic surgeons who have to role play with, I'm only laughing because it's not real, but obviously they have to face this in reality. They have role play with sort of annoyed patients or relatives and stuff that they have to do that. Okay, presentations. I mean, that is, so I take from that we have lots of folks who are in quite senior roles, because presentations are the things that more senior roles will do. So yeah, get some advice about your presentations. Keep to time or be early. That's always a good one, which I'm hoping hope I can actually demonstrate when we get to the end of this. Okay, so that gives me a good background in that. So we're going to switch now. I'm going to look at the interview questions that you gave me back through some of the chat function. And so we just pause briefly for me to have a quick look back through that. Sarah, was there anything that stood out to you from the chat functions? Or
sorry, just to mute myself. Yeah, there were a couple actually. I was just making notes on them. One of them that came early on was, how do you ensure that you stand out?
Okay, well, pink shirt is handy. Wear something bright, literally stand out. And we're going to do some stuff on how to do that in an interview. So that's good. Excellent.
There was also one about competency questions, and if your best examples are all from the same role, sometimes it feels a bit like, to use this gentleman's term, one time at band camp.
Yeah, that is a challenge, because your interview, if you only use one example and it sounds like the same example, they're going to feel like, well, has he only just done one project and then he's just described it from different angles? Now, there are ways of describing the same project from different angles to make it, take out the specifics out of it. So you might be able to use an example for a couple of answers if you can make it sound like it's a different answer. Your challenge will be if they say to you, was that the same project you talked about before? Then you're going to have to say yes. I mean, really challenge yourself. What other things can I talk about? How can I come at this from a different angle? So let's get into the interview stuff then. So we discussed some of the stuff in terms of online. You might face one-to-one, we might face some panels. You might have this no one at the other end, which is its own monster. If the other thing to do is practice whatever, I mean, this kind of sounds obvious, but whatever the platform it's on, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Skype, Webblaze, whatever the method is called, practice it with your friends so that you know the vagaries of it, particularly if you're having to give a presentation. So you need to know how to screen share, how's that going to work, is your cursor going to work, all that kind of thing. So Sarah's now going to launch me slide C, please, in terms of online interviews and how to prepare. And lots of this stuff is it's similar tips I would give you for telephone interviews. Always have the best quality line, so be heard, whether that's a landline, whether that's FaceTime audio if you're on a telephone. Same for the online. Make sure you're somewhere where you can get good Wi-Fi, and if that, wherever that is, get your best Wi-Fi, because they need to be able to see it and hear you. If you have chance, particularly on a phone, stand up and smile, because it, ironically, and it's a bit like when you smile on the telephone, you think, well, does it really? But it does change how you come over in terms of your voice. Everything's more open, etc. So stand up and smile, speak slower and enunciate more. I have a colleague called Priscilla Morris from Loud and Clear Voice Coaching who will tell you all about that if you need some help on that. But speak slower and enunciate more. Make sure they can hear what you're saying clearly. In terms of etiquette and tips, and there was a question about, which we just had, about how do you make an impression, but also how do you build rapport online, given that you're not going into a room and shaking hands, etc. So in terms of building rapport, you need to be seen and heard, because you can't build rapport unless you're seen and heard. The other thing is, pick a time of day that suits you. So you are going to be more engaging, and you're going to be more interested and more interesting if you pick a time of day that suits you. Make sure that you have your eyes to the camera so that you're not looking at the screen so that they're seeing the top of your head. Look at the camera, because that looks like you're looking at them. I mean, I'm having to watch the video that Sarah is doing in terms of the presentation through my peripheral vision. I'm not looking at it because I'm looking at you, so it looks like I'm looking at you. So that's the biggest tip I would give you. If you have to put an arrow next to the camera or a sticker or something just to remind you, look at the camera. That's the best way to build rapport with your audience, because it's going to look like you're looking at them. If you're facing that AI type interview where there's nobody at the other end, I had a client who had a great solution for that. She was a recent graduate, and she got her mum to stand the other side of her laptop and give her kind of nods and smiles and stuff. So she's actually getting some interaction with that rather than just looking at a camera. You might also want to be putting prompt words, things on the wall, anywhere out of view, so that you can actually have those with you. And also, if you put them above the camera, when you look at them, it'll look like you're looking at the camera. Dress to impress, have something bright on. Beware of tight stripes on a shirt, because they'll make a sort of jazz shape. So if you can just check out, what does it look like the other end? But dress to impress, dress smart, dress like you feel. And you only need to be smart from there up, don't you? So be comfortable, be smart. Have a glass of water, because you might find that you get nerves and cough. You might need a pause. You might need a thinking moment. Have a glass of water. That's always helpful. If you want to go to the next level, ninja level, it's suggested that you let your audience speak first. Now that's you have to be pretty self-aware to allow your audience to speak first, but there's something in the sort of humour interaction that says if somebody else speaks first, they they then are more trusting the second person that speaks. But you know, that's sort of ninja level. Have a pen and paper with you. And as I said, if you want to look up my 3-minute video about how to do online interviews, they're on you. That's on YouTube, or it's on my website. It's on just about every platform I'm on, so you can have a quick look at that. So, how do we prepare? So, we need to think about how we guess the questions. And what I would say to you is get the job description and the person spec, if there is one, you know, job advert, whatever they've given you in terms of information in advance. If it's a full job description with a person spec, I would say to you, go straight to the person spec. So it's usually on the back page, on the second page, at the end. It's the one with the bullet points in. And look at the keywords, and they will be those transferable skills that we looked at earlier. You know, teamwork, leadership, problem solving, adaptability, all of those, you know, IT skills, all of those transferable skills. Look what they are. What does it say? What's in the bullet points? Because it takes less time. So go straight to the person spec if there is one. Pick out the keywords. They will be how you're going to get shortlisted. They will be what they're going to ask you at interview. They will be what you get scored on at interview. They should be, logically, what they ask you about at interview. That's why those transferable skills are really so key. So find out what those transferable skills are, and then pick up the job description, so the longer bit with the rest of the sort of sentence-based stuff. So that's the how they want you to express those competencies. Sometimes called competencies. In America, it's called behavioural, but it's those what I would call standard interview questions. Give me an example of. Tell me about a time when. It's often called in the UK. It's called competency-based. Or it might be knowledge, skills and experience. What are those questions? What's those transferable skills? And so we've got some idea, hopefully from the person spec, about what the keywords are in terms of transferable skills. We've got some idea of how they want those demonstrated from the job description. Then we need to think about what makes a great answer. So Sarah, if you can launch slide D, that'd be brilliant. Now, if you were to internet search interview skills, I pretty much guarantee that they will talk about the STAR technique. Now, some of you will have come across it. For some of you, it will be completely new. And when they say STAR, they mean situation, task, action, result. Situation, task, action, result. Sometimes situation, time, action, result. Situation, task, action, result. Now, I like to simplify things, and if I can make them shorter, then I do. And Jaguar Land Rover, who make cars, use car, which is a great thing, because it shortens it. Because often, for me, it's quite difficult when I'm listening to someone give me an interview answer to separate the situation and the task. So I think it's easier to think about what was the challenge? So what was I facing? So what's the beginning of the story? What needed doing? What was the challenge? Action, what did I do? And then result, what happened afterwards? Now, if you can explain why that's a great result, so giving evidence, so that's why I make it into car care, evidence, C-A-R-E, and maybe think about what you did that nobody else would have done, because that's going to make you impactful, that's what's going to make you stand out. And also think about who benefits from that result and how do they benefit, because that's a great way to polish the answer. So Sarah, if you can launch slide E, which is a good answer is. So I've given you here, I'm going to leave this up I'm going to probably just leave this up now. But a great answer is something where you can, it's an answer to a question, it's specific, it's got some impact, it maybe has got some numbers, some nice big numbers, some impactful statistics, it's relevant, it's recent. And the thing that I would say to you is, if it's relevant, it doesn't matter how long ago it was. And don't tell your interviewer how long ago it was if it was a long time. And don't make it something that was specific. So if you say in the UK that you worked in Woolworths, people will know that Woolworths hasn't existed for years. Or you use a brand of car that is no longer in circulation, then you're going to tie it to a time. But if you can talk about something that is timeless. If it's relevant, it's relevant. If it's relevant and recent, it's almost like double points. But make sure it's relevant. Because I can talk about things that I was doing. I mentioned my career started in arts and theatre and sport and special events. I could talk about things from then, but that's a long time ago. But I wouldn't say 20 years ago, 25 years ago, whatever. I would just say, when I worked in this, this is what I did. This is what happened. This was the challenge, etc. So make it relevant, make it recent, make it relatable. If you can quantify, brilliant. So we'll leave that up so folks can perhaps make some notes on that. The other thing is that although you're not going into a room, you still have to make a first impression, and that will be how you respond on the phone, how you respond on an email, how you present yourself at the interview. You know, have we got a nice sort of bland and non-distracting background? Is the lighting right? Can they hear me? Can they see me? And all of those things. You can still make a first impression. And as they say, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. So think about that, which is why you need to kind of practice. What does it look like? What do people say? You know, what does the image look like? Because you get to be your own TV producer in terms of online interviews. Sarah, whistle stop. I think we've got to the final questions and answers, although it's been a bit fast. So I don't know what your impressions are in terms of what questions have come through that I need to.
I've got some questions that have come up in that last round, and I thought we could whiz through those.
Yeah.
Keep popping your questions in, guys, because if we haven't got time to get to them today, we will try and cover some of it either with Claire or perhaps in our next webinar to help move things forward. Okay, this is interview questions. Is asking about training opportunities a no-no in an interview?
No, I kind of like that. I mean, you could dress it as what development opportunities would there be in this role, because you kind of imply that they might talk about training within that. No, I think you can ask about training. That sounds fine to me.
What is it best to ask at the end of the interview?
Yes, that came up before as well. Now, I've got what I would say to you about your questions at the end is be aware that they are going to, this is the last impression. We're talking about first impression. This is the last impression you're going to leave. So be tactical about your questions. So put them in priority order, because you might find that you've got, let's say, 10 questions and you get past 2 and the interviewer says, oh, that's fine, we've run out of time now. And you don't want your killer question to be number 4, 5, 6 or 7, because you need to make sure that you've asked your top questions up front. Be tactical, because your questions will demonstrate how much homework you've done and how passionate you are about getting this job in this organisation, in this sector. That's why I say be tactical. So use them to illustrate that. Use them to get the panel into a discussion, because that gives you more of an opportunity to build rapport at the end and have a bit of a debate, a bit of a to and fro. And to learn a bit about them a bit more, something that will make you be able to decide whether you want that job or not. Now, what I would say to you is, if you have one of those sort of broad questions about what's the challenges that this organisation faces in the next 5 years or something, or one of those kind of broad questions, because you can ask about the sector, ask about their organisation, ask about the job. You've got those sort of 3 layers as well. If you're going to ask a question, have some idea of what you think the answer will be. So if they actually answer it, you say, well, that's interesting, because I thought you might mention X, and then you're in a dialogue. And also, you might find that if you ask one of those broad questions, they might turn it back on you before they answer. Because if somebody asks me that kind of question, I want to say, well, that's interesting. Before we answer, what do you think are the 3 biggest challenges facing this organisation in the next 5 years? And then you say, well, when I was researching, you have an answer. So have an answer, and then be able to get into that dialogue. So that's what I'm saying about be tactical. Take them with you, have them printed somewhere. So, because in the heat of the moment, you might forget what they are. And the other thing is that these are a bit sort of ninja skills again. So let's say you've got all your skills pinned up around your camera, so you're looking at the camera, and they forget to ask you the question that you were expecting, that you've got a brilliant answer for. Let's say that happens, and you think, oh, I've got that story, I haven't got the answer out. You could possibly use this twice, but maybe once. So they say to you, have you got any questions? And you can say, I thought you might ask me about blah, blah, because can I tell you about when I, but you've got to make it much shorter. You've got to really concentrate your answer. And they're not going to let you get away with it probably more than once. But what you do is you're leaving that interview having given them your killer answer. So some brilliant answer that you've got in a challenge, action, result, and who's the beneficiaries and all the rest of it. So that, would be some tactics for questions. You must ask questions, that's the other thing, because it shows that you care and you've done your homework. What else have we got, Sarah?
Next, does it go against you to take notes or cards in with buzzwords?
Well, you may be going face to face. I prefer a candidate to bring notes, a notebook, cards, or whatever in, because it shows that you're prepared. Now, if you sat in the interview and literally put the questions between you and the speaker, then that's a problem. But if you put them kind of out of the way, somewhere where you can see them, then it's not too distracting. And that's the beauty of online things, because you can have things pinned up, all around you, as long as they're not kind of in view. So yeah, I would say take notes. The only time that, there are some interviewers who have a pet thing about not wanting people to have notes. I kind of don't, that's not how I want people to be prepared. If they need a bit of confidence from taking some notes, then that's fine. And I would rather them have notes than they get somewhere and they've just lost the train of thought. And they, glancing at something and giving an answer is much better than not giving an answer at all. Because if you don't give an answer, you're not going to get any points on that question. And it's all about point scoring. Sarah.
Great. I'm just gonna pause for a second here and say it's 8 o'clock. I know we said we were planning to finish at 8 o'clock. I do have a few more questions, and I know that Claire is happy to stay on and answer a few more. If anyone does need to disappear now, we will be making all of this available. If you have any more questions, do put them in the chat. And like I said, we will be using that to inform future content. But we'll just go through and buzz through a couple of these questions that we've had.
Yeah.
When you are asked the question about specific experience of an action or a project or whatever, is it okay to openly state that you don't have experience, but you are a fast learner, adaptable, resourceful? Is that the right tact to take?
I think that's on the way, depending on what you're going to say, to a sort of an okay answer. What I would say is, if you have really done your homework about what they're likely to answer, so you've looked at your job description, you've worked out what the key words are, you know what the competencies are, you've got a good idea about what they're going to ask you, and you are going into that online or actual interview with all your notes. Let's say there's something in the job description that you haven't done. I really want you to be talking in the positive, and I want every answer to be a yes. So if they ask you about something and you literally answer, let's say they say to you, have you ever used Apple products? And let's say you haven't. You say, well, no, but I've used Microsoft products, which is the same as Apple because, So give them a sense of, you're asking about this, I've done this, and it's almost exactly the same thing. So you've got to be able to make that connection between, you're asking about this, I've done this. So you've got to work out what your direct or indirect connection is between whatever they're asking you. So try and make every answer a yes. If it's really something obscure, then I would do some research, and then encourage people to say, well, I noticed that you had that on your job description. You've asked me about it. I noticed it on the job description. I've researched. I understand it's about this. I understand it's about that. These are the key parts of that. This is the strengths and weaknesses, and this is what I can offer to that. So that you've got a yes. Because if you say, have you ever used Apple, and someone says no, then it's just a big fat cross. But if they say, they've got an answer, then you've got some chance of scoring some points on that particular question.
And would that be the same answer for this next question, which was what to say when you understand the topic, but you don't have practical examples of your experience of that?
I would say then do your, so, if you've got something that you really have not done, then do your research beforehand, and you say, look, I understand it's in the job description, it's really important. My research tells me that this, because it's then an answer. Because if you say no, then you're not getting any points. If you say, I've researched it, okay, you've used you've used your initiative, and you've got an answer. So it's a yes, or it's on the way to a yes.
Okay. What to do, and I guess this would be online or face-to-face, what to do if a panel member isn't engaging with you, smiling, nodding, showing any kind of encouragement?
Yes, now you don't know why they're not doing that. I remember actually being in, I think back to an interview that I had in a local authority where the local councillor was not paying attention. That really made me cross, for want of a better way of putting it. The thing is that you don't know why somebody's not engaged, and it might be that their Wi-Fi is rubbish, or they're hearing, they're not hearing you for whatever reason because they've got the sound on, or the doorbells are going and they've pressed mute, or whatever it is. I mean, try and engage your audience. If you've got a panel, then try. The thing is that if you can do a little bit of research about who you're likely to face, so if they tell you who's going to be interviewing you, do a little bit about what their background is, because it might be that they're a specialist, they're a lawyer, or an accountant or something. So they really are kind of focused on in the case of the accountant, they may be just figures people, not just, but they may be more focused on that bit, on a particular specialism, and that might be why they're sort of disengaged with some of the questions. But then at least you've got an answer for that. You've got in your mind, you're thinking, okay, that's why they may be less engaged.
Actually, someone has commented saying that in an interview they thought the panel were bored to death with them, but they offered them the job. So you never know.
It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter how engaged they are. If they give you the job, hurrah.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple more questions.
Yeah.
Is it okay to use the same examples in the application as you use in the interview?
Yes. Now, what I would say to use the same as I would say to when I work with undergraduates, assume that the people interviewing you have not read your application, don't know anything about you. Assume that they haven't read anything about you, because lots of times they haven't, because in these situations people get somebody's off and they draft somebody in the last minute. They might have read it, or they might not have read it. They might not have read it well, they might not remember. If they're interviewing 4 or 5 people, they might not remember one candidate from the next. So yes, it's okay to do that. I mean, you could ask for permission if you're really nervous. You say, well, I mentioned this in my application. Is it okay if I use the same example? And they can give you a yes or no, and they say, well, whatever you choose. If it's relevant and it's a great answer, use it again. I mean, they can always say, oh no, you said that in your application, give us another one. So you'd need a backup. But I would say to you, assume that the people who are interviewing you know nothing about you, because that's a better way to assume, because you're more likely to give them all that they need. Because people, genuinely, for whatever reason, haven't had time, haven't prepared, and if it's a great answer, it's a great answer. So, unless they stop you, it's a great answer. But have a backup just in case they say, no, we've had that in your application.
Okay. Someone has asked a question saying that they are dyslexic and have always seen it as a strength. However, they know it has negative connotations attached to it. Should they bring it up in the application or the interview, or should they avoid it? I guess it's similar to like if there's a question about weaknesses or anything like that, is there a way to avoid it, or should
it's interesting because I've had a couple of clients who've mentioned this, and actually the person who gave me the idea about having their mum stand behind the camera was somebody who was dyslexic, and she said it helped her. She was somebody who prepared in nth degree. I mean, the thing about that is that everyone is different, and everyone is wired differently, and people who have different shades of dyslexia, their brains are wired in different ways. Now, I had one client who had a great answer for that. So when I said to him, what are you going to say if they ask about your weakness? And he said, I'm going to say I'm dyslexic. But what happens then is when I'm in a team situation and we have to solve a problem, I ask different questions because my brain is wired in a different way. And as a result, we get a much more rounded solution to any given problem, because we know that we've attacked it from all sorts of different angles. Perfect. Use it as a strength. You're going to bring a different perspective, same as left and right hand. I mean, whatever people's differences are, that all makes for a much more rounded answer in whenever there's a problem to face or a challenge to tackle.
Another question, this was sent from the registrations. What to do if you go blank?
Okay. So I mean, hopefully, preferably don't go blank because you've done your preparation. I mentioned having a glass of water because that's a few seconds thinking time. Have your notes. I mean, you can ask them to repeat the question, or could they rephrase the question? That's a really powerful one, because if you ask them to rephrase the question and they are able to, now there are certain situations where people are very strict about what they ask and they have to ask the same questions in exactly the same order in the same way, and they can't ask any follow-up questions. But most people, most situations I think you're going to face, they'll say, oh yes, I can rephrase that. So this is a question about blah de blah. How would you approach this? And you might, in that time, you might have a chance to answer. The other thing, so rephrase, that's a great way, or repeat if they won't. You could ask them to say, could you give me some context why this is significant? In which case they might give you some clues in that. I mean, again, they might fend that off. But all of those things might give you enough thinking time. Now, the other thing to do is have a quick learner example. So let's say you really are stuck, and then you kind of feel a bit like the kind of rabbit in the headlights, and you're really stuck and you can't understand why they're asking it, or you have no answer. Just say, look, if you're asking me, can I be a quick learner? Can I tell you about how I mean, whatever it is, maybe something you learned in lockdown, could be anything. You know, have a quick learner example just in case you get stuck.
Great. Another question, just a couple more, and then I think we're going to have to cut it off at some point. Can you use humour to break the ice at the beginning? Is that advisable?
I mean, you can. It's the challenge with humour is it can be, you know, can sometimes it doesn't cross language or cultural barriers. It works better when you know your audience, and if these are people that you don't know at the other end, you know, I think I would encourage people to be their natural selves, and you know, have some small talk. I mean, you know, even at the beginning of this session, we were talking, you know, people were putting in the chat function, you know, about, you know, how awful the weather had been and all that kind of, you know, you can always talk about the weather, you know, how you're dealing with, you know, current situation, how's COVID treating you, you know, all that kind of thing. So have some small talk questions. I think that would be a good way to deal with that.
Okay, one more. Thank you notes. Should we be sending them? Is it appropriate?
Well, I think it's kind of nice, you know. I mean, you know, it's not going to hurt as long as it's not too long, and just say thank you very much. It was a great opportunity. You know, I look forward to hearing from you, and that kind of thing. I mean, don't make it too long. Certainly don't get into, you know, let's say they give you some feedback and you know, don't get into that kind of, you know, well, let's say they say to you, your teamwork answer could have been, just for the sake of plucking a question out of the air, your teamwork answer could have been better or could have said this. And you think, well, actually, you know, don't get into a kind of dialogue, because you never know when you might want to be applying there again. So just say, thank you very much, you know, valuable feedback, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I mean, you know, don't make it too long, be polite, you know, thank them for the opportunity. Yeah, I mean, it's a good way. You know, we can't shake hands as we leave a room, probably. So it's as good a way as any as sort of, you know, finishing your last impression to them.
And then just one more question. Feedback. It's come up a few times in the chat, and I think the fundamental thing that people want to know the most is what to do if you get no feedback. If they won't offer you feedback, there's no opportunity for feedback, and you either don't progress to the interview stage or you don't get the job at interview stage, but there is no feedback.
This is a hard one, because, you know, this is going to test everyone's resilience. You know, if you apply for lots of jobs, if you get lots of interviews and you don't hear back from applications or interviews, it's hard. Not everywhere will give you feedback. Not everywhere will give you good feedback. Lots of feedback tends to be someone was more experienced, in which case it's a kind of game, set and match, because they know that it's a hard one to argue. Someone else had more, you know, better experience, whatever. And people, you know, huge generalization, but good feedback is rare. And lots of organisations are really nervous about giving feedback because they're worried about getting into kind of litigation or lawsuits and stuff. So they tend, and then that makes them like, I'm not going to give you any feedback because I don't want to end up, you know, in a courtroom or something about it, or, you know, challenged, whatever. So lots of organisations, and someone tell you up front, they'll say, you know, unless you progress to stage whatever, you won't get any feedback. I mean, I would say to you, if you possibly can, make your last question. We talked about questions to ask at the end. I would make it direct. I would encourage my undergraduates to ask, regardless of the outcome of the interview, who should I ask for feedback? Because you're not saying, can I have feedback? Closed question. They can say no. You're asking, who should you ask? Now, they might still say, unfortunately, we can't give any, or, you know, speak to whoever, because that gives them the impression that you want to learn from it, regardless of how you get on. So that's always a good last impression to give. And who knows, they might give you some great feedback. I mean, some recruitment processes for certain jobs have, you know, they have a formula. So pilots and police officers and stuff will get a formula for what they need to work on for next time they apply and stuff. So yeah, feedback, I mean, if you can get it, it's great. Often it isn't good. You know, it's not helpful, not constructive. So, but try and ask for it. Yeah, try and get as much as you can. And also think about your own self-reflection. So as soon as you finish that interview, sit quietly with, you know, however you can take notes and think about, okay, what's my reflection on that? You know, how well did what could I do better next time? What went well, you know, and do some self-reflection, because that kind of feedback is probably going to be, you know, useful first. And then if they give you something, then it may or may not, yeah. So always ask.
We've still got a lot of people here, and there's just been a question popped in, and I imagine this is one that a lot of people will want to know. So I know I keep saying one more question, but I do mean it this time. Is it best practice to ask at the end when you will hear if you've got the job or not?
Yeah, I mean, you could ask that. You know, when should I expect to hear? You know, and they may be guarded, or they might just say, "Oh, yes." I mean, it's a great question to ask, because it gives you some idea of what the expectation is, particularly if you're perhaps juggling a couple of interviews or a couple of things that you might get offered, because it will be useful because they might say, "Oh, yes, we have to wait for the board or the committee to meet at the end of the month or something," in which case you think, "Oh, okay." You know, you've got to give you some idea of what you can juggle and what you can't. I'm not saying that everyone is, you know, is in that wonderful position, but it gives you some idea of when to expect, because they might turn around and say it's going to be a fortnight, in which case then, yes, you're going to be, you know, a bit nervous in that time, but you know what to expect. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question to ask. When should I expect to hear the results of the panel? The other thing is that when you don't hear, sometimes it's good news, because they're still, you know, they're working out what they can offer you, or your second choice, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. If ultimately you get offered the job, doesn't matter how many people are ahead of you, you get the job. So, you know.
Okay, brilliant. I think
there's another one.
I think we could probably go all night. So I think we're gonna call it a day here. We are 15 minutes over, so apologies for that. But thank you for staying with us. Obviously, there's quite a few people in the chat that have said that they found it really, really helpful. So that's fantastic. We're so thrilled that we can bring this to you with Claire as a free opportunity. And like I said earlier, we'll continue to do so. So topics that we maybe haven't touched on as much today, application process, application filling, things like that. We will be looking to put that out. So do keep an eye on our website. Claire has also offered discounted rates for anyone who would like to pursue some one-to-one interview coaching with her directly. So just simply get in touch with her or myself, and I can pass on your details. You just need to reference the fact that you've watched this webinar. As I said at the beginning, we have recorded this session, so we will be making that available to everyone. I'll hopefully be getting that out to you all tomorrow. There will be a short opportunity to complete a feedback survey. We'd love to hear what you think. We'd love to hear your suggestions on other topics that we can put on that will help you. I just want to say a big thank you to Claire. Thank you for giving up your evening to be here with us tonight. It was absolutely fantastic, and like, the chat has been incredible, guys. You clearly have enjoyed it, and that's all that we really needed to hear, and you found it really useful as well. So,
well, thank you very much for the Museums and Heritage Show for inviting me, because, you know, it's been brilliant. It's been a great opportunity for me to kind of focus, you know, getting a message across to a large audience. And thank you very much for people who sent questions in advance, and all the folks who put stuff in the chat and taking part in the polls, because it's such a huge audience. It's a pity we don't get sort of face-to-face or smaller groups, but, you know, the message gets out. That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. I hope you all have a good evening, and we'll send through some information for you tomorrow. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, everyone.